He's off on stage and Stromboli introduces him and talks about how wonderful this is going to be, and Pinocchio comes out on stage with his strings on and drops them, and then he falls down the steps and put his nose in a hole, makes a fool out of himself. And that's when Stromboli, first time Stromboli shows his true character, because he just really yells and screams at him. And he has his back to the audience, Stromboli, while he's doing this, so he's not noticing how the audience is reacting. Typical tyrannical parent, right, who's not noticing that society is reacting a different way than him, and he's not happy about it. And Pinocchio, of course, is dazed and feels like a fool, and he is a fool, so that's appropriate. But then Stromboli hears the crowd laughing, and as soon as he turns around, he's like all smiles again. And so that's the first time you get insight into what sort of puppet master he is. He's there to please the crowd, and that's all. And he's there to look good in public, but fundamentally he's a tyrant. And I guess that's the problem with false celebrity, is that the negative spirit of the crowd becomes your master, right? Because to be a celebrity, you have to be a crowd pleaser. And if you're pleasing the kind of crowd who likes a celebrity like you, and there's not much reason for that, then it's not exactly like you're appealing to the proper side of the crowd, and you've become its puppet one way or another. And maybe it's rewarding you with wealth, perhaps, and with attention, but fundamentally, it's not something I would recommend if you want to stay reasonably psychologically healthy for any reasonable amount of time. You're going to sell yourself out. And I don't mean that in any casual way, you know. All right, so anyways, Stromboli changes from the tyrant to the good father in half a second. He gives Pinocchio a pat on the head, despite the fact that he's made a mistake, looks all kind, and the show continues. Now, the cricket is not very happy about this. He's sitting in the stage watching. He's very angry and, let's say, disgusted by what's happening, partly because Pinocchio is making a fool of himself. Now, that's an interesting thing, you know. Human beings blush. In fact, if I remember correctly, the name Adam, you know, like Adam and Eve, is related to the capacity to blush. Now, that comes from something I read a long time ago, and that might be wrong, but Adam does manifest shame in the sight of God, so there is a relationship there. But anyways, people do make fools of themselves for public display, and you can tell you've done that in some sense, not always, if you blush, because you've either said something you shouldn't have, and you know, you realize that, which is more like you've tried to be funny and gone a little bit too far, and sometimes that can be really funny, or you've said something that you know to be false, manipulative, deceitful, beneath you, any of those things, and you'll have an automatic response to it. You'll be ashamed and blush. And one theory about that is that you can trust people who blush, and so because you know that their conscience will betray them, and so that even if they are lying, they tell you. And so it's an interesting theory, you know, because blush is definitely, like, it's a facial display, you know, it's right out there where people can see it. So, you know, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but it's kind of an interesting idea. Anyways, the cricket is not happy with what's going on. He's not happy about Stromboli, and he's not happy about the willingness of Pinocchio to make a fool of himself to support this false celebrity. And so I actually think that's why the celebrity types like that often get narcissistic and arrogant, you know. It's because they aren't paying attention. They're not paying attention really to what's happening inside of them. They drown it out because the glory and the money and all that is so attractive and enticing. They don't notice, they refuse to notice what price they're paying for it, and they magnify up their grandiosity and their arrogance to keep that stuff all under control. And then, of course, they get surrounded by sycophants, which is a really bad thing, right? They get surrounded by people who will tell them exactly what they want to hear. And that's really bad if what you want to hear from other people is not good for you. To surround yourself with people who won't offer you genuine criticism or even genuine reward. It's the same thing. Like, you want from me that I differentially reward and punish you in approximately the way that the good part of the crowd will. That's what you want from all your friends, because then your interactions with them can generalize out to the broader community in a productive way. And so a good friend, you know, I mean, your friends tend to be on the supportive side, and perhaps that's appropriate, assuming there's reciprocity. But a good friend will also tell you when, one way or another, when your behavior is starting to tilt in a direction that's going to make you unpopular with them and likely unpopular with other people. And of course that's what a parent is supposed to, that's the prime job of a parent in my estimation. It's like, don't do that. Other people will hurt you if you do that. By exclusion, by threat, by failure to offer you an opportunity, bad things will happen to you. So you can't do that. And then you're a representative of the social situation, which is exactly what you should be, not a friend. So, or at least not precisely a friend. That doesn't make you an enemy, it makes you better than a friend. Well, so Pinocchio's on stage making a fool of himself, and then he gets all tangled up in other puppet strings. That's what happens to him, and then it all ends rather badly with everything being a tangled mess on stage, but it also turns out to be rather funny. It's funny because he's surrounded by angry Russians, you know, which, you know, you could kind of view that as a potential lesson, is that if you're a puppet on a stage and you mess around too much, you just might get tangled up with a bunch of angry Russians, and these are Cossacks. That's exactly what happens. So anyways, of course, no, that's not what's happening here, but it's still funny. So Stromboli is not happy with the tangled mess, but then the crowd reacts very positively, and then that confuses the conscience because he thinks, well, look, this is horrible. This guy's a tyrant. Like Pinocchio's making a fool of himself. Everything turns into a tangled mess, but the crowd goes crazy. And, well, being a fool, that can be entertaining, right? So it's hard to tell when a crowd, especially at a spectacle, because this crowd is at a spectacle, you just don't know exactly why it is that they're responding positively, but you've definitely given them what you want. And you can see this look on Stromboli's face. It's like this false, again, this false kindness and generosity, public facing. And, oh well, anyways, the conscience is very confused. And I really think this is an important thing, because I've often thought, I spent a lot of time thinking about Hitler, and I was thinking, well, how do you get into a state like that, you know? And you think, well, he's a dictator and he led his people down a bad path. It's like, that's not right. That is not what happened. They had a conspiracy together and went down a bad path. Now, think about it this way. If one person thinks something about you, it's like, whatever, right? But if 5 people tell you that, well, what? Then to start not taking that seriously is kind of narcissistic, right? And if it isn't 5, let's say it's 15 people tell you the same thing or act the same way towards you. It's like, probably you should clue in. Well, what if you're a politician and you're trying out a bunch of different ideas, and you're good at interacting with the crowd, you're charismatic, you watch the crowd, but you're not necessarily all that articulate, you don't have your values all straightened out, but you're kind of angry too. And maybe that's because you spent a bunch of time in World War I in the trenches, which was like no joke, and all your friends got blown up. And then you were unemployed, and then you tried to be an artist, and that didn't work out even though you were moderately talented. And then maybe the economy fell apart completely on you, hyperinflation. And then maybe there was a communist menace coming in from the east, and there genuinely was. And so you're not the world's happiest clam at that point. And you're talking to people who aren't that happy either, because they were also badly defeated in World War I, and then they had a terrible treaty they had to sign, and they lost part of their territory. And so the crowd's not happy, and neither are you, and there's reason for it. And so you start talking to them. You don't know what you're upset about, and neither does the crowd. So you start to articulate some things about why you might be upset. And some of them fall flat, but you're paying attention to the crowd. So you stop saying those things. And some of the things make the crowd really wake up and listen. And so you start saying more of those things, right? It's an unconscious dialectic between you and the crowd. It's mediated by consciousness, but it's not like you're sitting there saying, although you might be, I'm going to tell this crowd more what it wants to hear. It's more sophisticated than that. And so you do that 1,000 times, and you do that to ever increasing crowds. And the crowd really starts to go mad. And they basically tell you that you're the savior of the nation. It's like, how many bloody people have to tell you that before you start to believe it? You know, I would say with a typical person, 100 will do it. That'll get you going, man. If 100 people tell you specifically why you're special, you're going to be thinking, even if you're kind of humble to begin with, you're going to be thinking, geez, there's got to be something to this, man. But if it's 1 million people and they're roaring their approval, well, And then when it's a whole nation, it's like, good luck withstanding that.